Well, welcome back to another episode of the Complete Student Podcast. We are joined today by the owner-operator at Chick-Fil-A in Bellevue. His name is Tom Deall. Tom, thanks so much for being with us today.
Absolutely my pleasure. I love being here.
Yes, how are you doing?
I'm great.
Good?
I'm doing good.
That's awesome. Well, just to start off, tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get to the point of becoming the owner of Chick-Fil-A Bellevue, kind of that story of just getting here.
So I was born and raised in New York, Brooklyn, New York, and when I was a teenager, my father decided to move the family to southern Arizona. I'm still not sure I understand that move, but you can imagine the culture shock in that endeavor. I'm one of 5 children, 2 brothers, 2 sisters, and I grew up as a teenager in Arizona, then went to high school and college there. But in second grade, believe it or not, I knew I had to fly for the Air Force. I can't tell you why. I still don't understand it. But I spent about 27 years in the military, retired at a Robbins Air Force Base in Georgia. And while in Georgia, I met a dear friend of mine who owned a Chick-fil-A. And so in the later stages of my career, I knew that I had to plan for what lies ahead. Yeah. And my really burning desire was to work with young people. That's really where I wanted to be. So the choice was between working as a communications director at a university or being an ROTC instructor or working at Chick-fil-A. And there's a lot of commonalities, believe it or not. Yeah. And so unfortunately, the Air Force lost my paperwork quite a few times. Divine intervention maybe, I don't know. And the university was looking for me to work in a position to where I really didn't have a voice. And so that wasn't going to work out quite well. And then Chick-fil-A showed up, and he offered me the opportunity to run one store and then eventually run the other store, which really gave me a good foundation for what is this business all about. Yeah. And I grew up in food service. I was on my mother's apron strings for many, many years. In fact, my mother started out cooking in a convent and then retired as a cook supervisor in a prison. Wow. So she worked with, audiences and people from both ends of the spectrum. And by the way, I loved both. She often brought me into the prison or brought me into the convent, and I loved both. So I knew that's where I wanted to be. How do I take my faith and my love for food and my degree in counseling and bring it all together? Yeah. Quite frankly and simply put, Chick-fil-A did all of that for me. Wow. And that's how I ended up working at Chick-fil-A. After about 2.5 years, applied to get a store. And they called me up one day and said, "What do you know of Bellevue, Nebraska?" And I said, "Believe it or not, I know a lot about it because being in SAC as a B-52 navigator, this was Mother SAC. Yeah. So where else to go but back where you started?" And my first time here in the Air Force at Offutt was in 1986, and here I was in 2012, back home, so to speak.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You talked about the culture shock of going from New York to Arizona. Yeah. I don't know what time of the year is, but depending on the time of year, that's a big weather shock.
Oh. Well, let's put it this way. In New York, you do have all the seasons. But I remember being in Arizona, and they had something called dashboard recipes, which meant that you could take an oven bag, put literally your raw meat, potatoes, fish, and everything on the dashboard, and it was so hot that it would actually cook it, so by the time you got done with work, you had your meal ready for you. Yeah. Now, come on, that's hot.
About 5 years ago, I moved from Minneapolis, Minnesota to Phoenix, Arizona. Oh, God. And when I left Minneapolis, it was -20. And when I got to Arizona, it was 80. So it was a 100-degree difference jump in one day. And it was like, that was a shock.
Yes, that's a shock.
That's pretty crazy. So you said that you wanted to work with young people. Yes. What was it about young people that you wanted to work with young people?
Yeah. Well, for me, and I know it may sound corny, but for me, everybody should have that desire. And the reason is very simply because they eventually are the people who replace us. If you really think about it. I don't care what you do in life, whether you are the President of the United States or the principal of a school or the pastor of a church or the owner of a store, we're none of us are going to do that forever. Right. right? So who replaces you? So don't you think it's our obligation to prepare the people behind us to eventually replace us?
Yeah.
And if we don't take personal attention in that, then we have to sit there and just accept whatever happens.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not very good at that. I don't sit idly by for anything. So for me, you have to have a passion for not only taking care of who you're around today, but to really prepare those people who replace you tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I just love and have a passion for that.
Yeah.
And so that's always been my desire, and I love developing people. There's nothing better than being in a position of responsibility or authority, and instead of using that against people, you use it for people. And so that's just kind of been my drive for as long as I can remember.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. That's so amazing. So as you're owning Chick-fil-A and you guys are always looking at young people. I mean, a lot of 16-year-olds, their first job is they want to go work for Chick-fil-A, right? So what are some of those things some values that you prioritize when it comes to those that you're looking to hire and bring onto your team?
You know, it's a very easy answer for me, because when we interview people, we tell them that there's 3 priorities. They're really very simple. The first one is faith and family, and I don't think they're disconnected, okay? I'm not defining their faith. I'm not saying that you have to be my religion or I have to be yours, but you do have to bring faith to the table. And it's simply because, and you can check out all the statistics you want, but when you have a faith foundation, you're building on solid ground. Yeah. Otherwise, it's kind of like building a 10,000 square foot house on sand. Looks impressive, can really impress a lot of people and bring awe, but it's not going to last very long. You got to have that foundation, and that concrete foundation for me is faith. So faith and family are number 1. Education is number 2, because ignorance in any situation doesn't build the future. It just doesn't. So our priority is very simple: faith and family, then education, and then the business. And we make sure that we don't flip-flop those at any time. So even in the restaurant, you'll never hear us talk about sales. We just don't do that. We talk about growing the people, and we attract people by having them referred in by other team members. The question is, would you work next to them? And in the most difficult of days, do you want that person next to you? And it's simply, that's our priorities.
Wow. Yeah. That's awesome. So as you got kind of defined what you look for, but once they're on the team, once they're with you guys, what are some things that as team members you value and say, like, this is what we want to be known for?
Right. So the most important thing is, I don't care. We take them as young as 14, okay? And it makes it a little bit more challenging from a scheduling perspective, because there's all kind of labor laws associated with 14 and 15-year-olds. But I love bringing them in that young, because the first thing we do is we teach them how to communicate face-to-face. We're in a very technological world, and everybody texts and social networks, but talking face-to-face is an amazing art, okay? You know, Christ didn't call people up. He didn't text them. He didn't, you know what I mean? He didn't email them. He didn't social media them. He actually talked face-to-face. And there's a certain art to that. There's also an art to saying to somebody, you did something wrong, but not diminishing them. You know what I mean? So for us, a big part of what we do is watch people grow from the time we get them very young, and we make sure they understand that you're being paid, correct? Yes, that's correct. Then you're a professional at what you do. So you have a choice. You can either act like a professional or a child. Which do you want people to see? So what guests see is a young professional who's speaking well and treating them with respect. It's that simple. I don't care who they are. I don't care how they're dressed. I don't care how they speak. Treat them with respect, just like you would want to be treated. I even tell the folks in the back, don't ever put a sandwich out that you wouldn't eat. Don't ever put a salad out that you wouldn't eat. It's not a matter of how much they pay for it. It's put yourself in their position. How do you want to be treated? What kind of food do you want to be given? How do you want to be respected? And that's what we ask of these young people from the very beginning. You are a professional. And here's the other piece of this. You are starting your career whether you think so or not. All right? What does that mean? So what that simply means is, as you grow, you don't magically become a parent. You don't magically become the president. You don't magically become the CEO. Somewhere along the line, you started very, very young.
Started somewhere.
Somewhere,
Yeah.
okay? And we want you to start here. So think as a professional, number one, and start your career now.
Yeah.
See, anybody can get a job. You want a job, go anywhere you want, get paid for it, and be done with it. But this is a career, which means I want you to look right. I want you to sound right. I want you to treat people with dignity and respect. And I want you to know that you're a professional. Yeah. That's career-minded. A job means just come in, fill the spot. You don't have to be great at it. I'll pay you and then get out. Yeah. That's a job. Yeah. But a career says you need to bring all of these to the table and do so well, because you know what? There are days that we don't want to be there. There's days I don't want to be a parent. But you can't just say, you know what, kids, sorry, I don't feel good today, or I'm having a bad day, so I'll be your dad next week. Yeah. It doesn't work that way. Yeah. You see what I mean? So all of this really plays into how we bring that kind of professionalism and career-mindedness to the table.
Yeah. I resonate with what you're saying. I think that communication, conversation is sort of a lost art today. Oh, and, people don't know how to ask questions. And I love that you give young professionals the opportunity to ask questions and to become owners of what they're doing. But, so often when I spend a lot of time going into high schools and meeting with high school students. And I would say that in terms of language and communication, high schools are some of the most vulgar places to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so how do you guys, I guess, train those students, those young professionals, and what value and importance do you put on their language, and how do you kind of address that when they're coming from a setting where it's like they're maybe using language that you don't want to be used in your store, but as a young professional.
So for me, I grew up in a family to where foul language just wasn't. It wasn't even a matter of being allowed. It just wasn't used. Yeah. And I remember as a little boy, my father saying, by using foul language, you're just demonstrating the fact that you have the lack of an English language. You just have a limited vocabulary. Yeah. And I always remember that thinking, when I was young, I was like, I'm not sure I know what that means. But as I grew older, I certainly recognized that. Yeah. And when I got into the military, the language was interesting. Yeah. But they knew around me I don't use that language. Yeah. For me, it's all about modeling. So I don't use that language. Mm-hmm. My partner, Tanya, doesn't use that language. My leadership doesn't use that language. So the first part of it is modeling, okay? I hate to admit it, but Chick-fil-A has kind of lowered even their dress standards a little bit. So when I first joined as an owner-operator, ties were required. They're not anymore. But you notice I still wear them. Mm-hmm. Because for me, it's a matter of, I want you to walk in and see us every day. We're present every day. I'm in the building every day. And I want to make sure that they understand that even on my worst days, I'm still going to wear the tie. Even on my worst days, you're never going to hear a foul language come out of my mouth. Yeah. Even when I'm dealing with very difficult guests, I'm never going to use a foul language. I may communicate with them in a little more aggressive manner, but never with a foul language. Because for me, and I remember hearing this from Miss Brown, who was my senior English teacher in high school. She said, if you ever raise your voice or use foul language, you've already lost the argument and you've lost control. And I'm kind of big on the control thing. So, so for me, if you have to resort to that, you're just demonstrating that you've lost the argument anyway. Yeah. Take control of the language, take control of yourself, and go back to, I'm a professional. Mm-hmm. Professionals don't need to use that language. They really don't. And so the biggest part of what we do is model it every single day. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you to role play a little bit with me.
Sure.
So, you talked about the angry customer, and, as the owner, you've got a little bit more say. If I'm a 16-year-old and I'm an employee and someone's coming at me really strong, and how would you from a 16-year-old perspective, address that customer?
Well, first of all, you mean address the customer or correct the young person?
Address the customer
Okay,
who's
so
maybe given
so the
employer.
first thing I do is I pull the young person away. I've got this.
Okay.
And I make it very, very clear.
Yeah.
I've got this. I do not expect you as a young person to have to deal with this adult who's behaving incorrectly.
Yeah.
Lesson number one, they're behaving incorrectly. And I need them to know that. Even though they're older than you, doesn't mean that their behavior is always correct.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. They're behaving incorrectly. Number two is I always defend the team member. Okay? I never sit there and go, well, they're a 16-year-old and they're not very bright and, they'll have a lot to learn. I don't do that. Yeah. And you see a lot of people do that, and it bothers me when they do that. They'll say things like, well, they're only a 16-year-old, they don't know any better. Yeah. They might be 16, but they're still a young adult and they still demand respect. Mm-hmm. Respect goes both ways. Yeah. It really does. So you'll never hear me say to a guest, well, I'm sorry, they just don't know what they're doing and they're just a young, inadequate, incompetent. I never do that. I address the guest where they are. Mm-hmm. So I'll say something like, can you tell me what the problem is? Yeah. And if they raise their voice or they use foul language, I dismiss them. I absolutely dismiss them. And I especially love when they say, well, I'll never come back. And I'll say to them, that's a good thing because I don't want them to hear this language. Wow. And I will do that. And I'll make sure that the people around me hear that. Yeah. Because they have to know that, number one, I've got your back. Yeah. Number two, I don't expect or accept that language on either side of the counter. Mm-hmm. We demand respect for you. Mm-hmm. We'd like it back in return. Mm-hmm. So if you can't do that, then go somewhere else where that's common and normal. It's not common or normal here. Right. So, and that's a big part of it. And it's funny, recently that happened. Mm-hmm. And I had a person who was just spinning up. And I pulled everybody away and I went to the window and I took care of this person. And everybody around me got really quiet because they're like, oh my goodness, what's happening? But they heard me say, I can't allow you to treat or speak to these people that way. Can't do it. I don't care if they're a young person or an adult. I can't let you do that. Yeah. So if you can't calm yourself down, then I need you to leave. And the person looked at me and said, give me what I want or I'm not moving. And that's when I said, well, here's the problem. I'm the owner, which means you're on my property now. So you either leave or have to call the authorities. You would do that? Yes, I would. You need to leave. And then the person left because they knew that I wasn't going to back down, number one. And number two, I had their back. Yeah. I wasn't going to sit there and do what they wanted me to do and also put them down. Yeah. That's not going to happen. That spoke volumes to them because they thanked me later on. Because they said, it's nice to know that you have my back. Right. I will always have your back. Now, if you're wrong, we're going to have a conversation at a shot. But I also remember as a young officer in the military, I also remember the old adage, and it's a great adage no matter what the environment is you praise in public and you criticize in private. Yeah. Shouldn't we also do that on the work site? Mm-hmm. I think that speaks volume. I see parents, I remember one time, it really struck me. I remember I was on the street in Brooklyn, and this mother, I don't know what she got angry about, but she was obviously very, very stressed. Yeah. And she was with a little boy. It still affects me to this day, and this is like 50 years ago. Wow. But she was walking up the street, and I'm watching her with this little boy, and he was upset about something. But you could tell that she was also stressed out about something that had nothing to do with him. Had nothing to do with him. And she took his ice cream, threw it in the street, lifted his shirt, and smacked him on the small of his back. Wow. And I'm sitting there thinking, that little boy took the brunt of your anger, even though he's not the source of the anger. Yeah. Don't do that. Yeah. And I, as a little guy myself, yelled at her, and I said, don't do that. Don't hit him like that, because he didn't make you angry. Something else did. Yeah. But that little boy lost his ice cream and she lifted his shirt so that the sting would be even greater. Mm-hmm. There's something wrong with that. She, if there was something to correct, she could have picked him up and held him. You know what I mean? Yeah. That would have spoke volumes to that little boy. Yeah. instead of getting that beating in public. It just bothered me. And so for all these years, I remembered that, and I try very, very hard not to treat people like that, especially in public. If I'm going to correct you, it's going to be in private. Now, you're going to get an earful, but it's not in front of everybody else. It's just not appropriate. So I make sure that they know I have their back, and if anybody's really that abusive, step back, I've got this.
No, I mean, I really appreciate the way that you speak so highly of your young professionals. And I think that helps when it comes to those moments where you do have to pull them aside and bring that correction. And so what does that look like for you? You know, when you do have to say, you know, you were wrong in this moment, but at least you've built up the respect of those young professionals because you treat them like young professionals.
So I can give you an example, especially when a person is leaving the restaurant. I always tell them there's a good way and a bad way. The good way is you're telling me what you're planning on doing, what you're thinking about, and give me the opportunity to help you do that, okay? But if you leave like, oh, by the way, I'm leaving and I'm doing it tomorrow, and it's because and they give me a lot of different reasons. That's not a good leaving. And the reason it's not a good leaving is because, number one, you didn't give me a chance to really discuss what you're doing. You essentially took it upon yourself to go apply, interview, discuss, and everything else, and then you're just walking out the door, and you're catching us off guard. So we have that discussion. And the discussion looks something like this. It has nothing to do with Chick-fil-A. It has nothing to do with this. We'll replace you, and that's not an issue, okay? There are many 14-year-olds that will replace a 16 will replace the 18, and so on and so forth. But what I want you to learn from this is that at some point, you're going to be in a career where you can't backdoor your boss. You can do it once. You might even get away with it twice. But let me tell you something. If you're in a certain career field, they will talk about this. And I don't want you to be in a position where you're hurting yourself. So you have to make sure that the people you're working with kind of understand what you're thinking about. What am I thinking about? Because for me, it's a matter of I always went to my bosses and said, let me tell you what I'm thinking about. And in most cases, they directed me in a better path that I never even knew existed, which is why I was successful in my Air Force career. Because I would go to them every 6 months and say, let me tell you what I think I've done right. Let me tell you what I think I've done wrong. And let me tell you what I think I'd like to go in the next 2 to 3 or 4 years. And in so many occasions, they said, you know what, but we have a better opportunity over here. Which and I remember in one case, it was going into a different career field. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I really don't want to do that, thinking it, but listening to them because they've had more experience. So it's a matter of saying to them, look, this isn't about me, and it's not about the store. The store will survive without you. It has, and it will continue. But you're not giving me the opportunity to give you what I mean, I've got almost 50, 60 years of experience. Can you let me share some of that with you? Okay? That's really what I think we have an obligation to the young people about. I always tell my son, he hates it when I say it, I will always have 25 years more experience than you do. Okay? Let me give you the hindsight. Let me give you the advantage of that experience. And that's a big part of the conversation. I also tell them, make a decision. Now, there might be a better decision, but I'd rather you make a decision than stand there and make no decision. You know, the refrigerator's on fire. You might want to put the fire out. You know what I mean? As opposed to call me up and go, well, there's a fire. What do you want me to do? Well, put it out.
Can we, please? Quickly.
We can discuss later maybe a better decision. But for me, a big part of it is, you know, you have these amazing people. We're all very well-educated leadership. My partner, Tanya, has a degree in biochemistry. You know what? Give her an opportunity to give you the vast experience of her academics. You know what I mean? And so often they don't want to do that. They want to kind of go off on their own. And in so many cases, it doesn't work. So a big part of it is, you know what? Use us. We have all of this experience. We have all of this education. Use us. And use us to your advantage, not mine. Because if you leave tomorrow, I'm still going to do the same thing I'm doing every day. But if you give me the opportunity, I will guide you in a path that is probably better for you than you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
And I can give you myriad examples of doing just that.
Yeah. Before we sat down and started talking, you were talking about, and even mentioned it in the first point, but just how faith plays such an important part of our role as employees or as employers. And so for you personally, and just how does your faith play into the work that you do?
Yeah. So I need to say this up front. I don't want anybody to hear a claim of perfection. Especially when I'm teaching classes at church, I always say, remember, we are perfectly imperfect.
Yeah.
There's only one perfect human that I'm aware of, and his name was Christ, and I'm not him.
Yeah.
Okay, so I need to make sure that's clear. I don't claim perfection. I make mistakes just like everybody else. But what I love about having faith as the foundation is that in the end, there's always somebody I have to answer to. Always. I could be in the highest position ever, but I always have to answer to God. And I have to answer for him now. But what really concerns me the most is in eternity.
Yeah.
Okay? So you can think that you're at a level to where, you know what, I'm in charge. I'm the boss. Ultimately, no, you're not. Everything we have, whether it's my salary, my clothes, my car, my house, is a gift.
Yeah.
And it's a gift that was given to us to use to everybody's benefit. So where faith comes in is it's the constant reminder of just that. Okay? I may have a great salary, but that's a gift, and I better use it wisely.
Yeah.
And I better use it generously. And I better use it for what he wants me to use it for. Okay? So all of those things come into play because in the end, what faith does for us is it puts everything that we are and everything that we have into a perspective.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes we hear people that are either CEOs or presidents or whatever, and you listen to them and you're like, you forgot that.
Yeah.
You forgot that you have a higher authority. You're not the end all, okay? And where you are is limited. What he provides is infinite. Which one do I strive for?
Yeah.
You know, ultimately, you know what? I don't care how much money I have. In the end, I'm not taking it with me anyway. You know what I mean? And I know that sounds kind of cliches and very corny, but I really do try to live that every day. So if you come in a restaurant, in fact, I have a little statuette. Truett Cathy, who founded Chick-fil-A, gave it to me. When I became an operator, he gave that to me. It's a little tiny statuette, and it's a statue of Christ washing the feet of St. Peter. And the reason that's important is because it ultimately speaks to humility and service. And that's a guiding post for me. And here's kind of a funny thing. I'll probably get in trouble for this. But even people at Chick-fil-A have asked me to remove that. They said it's overly religious. And I'm sitting there going, how can humility and service be overly religious?
Yeah.
And I won't take it down. In fact, I glued it to the... I glued it so nobody can accidentally knock it down. It's in place.
It's a perfect opportunity for you to share what
Exactly.
it means.
So I love when people ask me, what is that? And then I get to share what that is.
Yeah.
I wear a tie that has a cross on it. What is that? And I share with them what that is.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, the inspiration for this tie is Lou Giglio. I'm Catholic and he's not, but he talks about, the finest part of the human body, and he talks about that. And I saw this tie and I thought, that's exactly what that is.
Yeah.
So I wear it as a reminder to me. Does it bring perfection? It does not. But it certainly is very grounding when I need it the most. And when I'm having the most difficult of days, I kind of look up and go, you know what? You put me here. What do you want me to do? Where do you want me to be? What do you want me to say? Yeah. Please help me with this one. Or if I really messed up, it's like, give me the courage to go correct that.
Yeah.
Give me the courage to say I'm sorry. Give me the courage to say, you know what? Even though you're a lot younger, you were right and I was wrong. It's that sense of service and humility. Yeah. And when we forget that, that's when we go off the rails, in my opinion. Yeah. So, all the social discord that we have, it's because we actually think we're better than somebody else. Yeah. How do you get to that point of arrogance? I don't know that. Wow. And I must admit, I grew up in a family where my parents were amazing when it came to that. Very poor in Brooklyn. But on any given day, I swear, my mother's house was like the UN. I mean, you name the nationality or the religion or the culture, and it was in my house. Yeah. That's what I grew up with. And I just didn't know there was a difference. Yeah. I mean, it sounds really silly, but I didn't. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so if you look at my house, I'm like, my son-in-law and my daughter-in-law are both African American. My wife is Mexican American. My other daughter-in-law is probably the whitest human being you've ever met in your life. and my kids are a mix of all of that. And my granddaughter is like the model of that. She's like all of it wrapped into one. And we just did a 23andMe, and she's like, she's like, what is she? Well, the earth. So I'd like to believe that I live it every day as well. That's beautiful. Yeah.
Tom, thank you so much for your time, this conversation. This has been such a great conversation. And honestly, I think our students are going to tremendously benefit from you sharing. And so thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Appreciate you having you.
I'm humbled by being asked. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
So remind us one more time, for those who are watching and listening, where your store is located so they can come by.
Right. So I'm at Chick-Fil-A in Bellevue, obviously Nebraska, because there is a Bellevue, Washington. Bellevue, Nebraska. And I am just west of the Cornhusker and 75 interchange. Awesome. Come see us. Stop by the window. You don't even have to buy anything. Just stop by and say hello. I love that. The interchange is just amazing to me, and I have a great time doing it. Awesome. That's why I'm there every day.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.